Sitting in the pews of the churches I grew up in, Black people created a space to express their suffering. If you would only listen, you can hear a story of a people not meant to survive, yet, despite their suffering, retain their spirit. Songs were the mouthpiece of Black experiences. They described our suffering. They also told codes telling us that joy comes in the morning. Yet, outside of the space of my church, of the lyrics of these songs, Black suffering is rarely validated, let alone dealt with compassionately. We need spaces to express our experiences of being both Black and American. Our experiences are unique and deserve to be contextualized in the history that we teach. When we are given spaces to experience our suffering deeply, we are given a chance to heal. So, what does Black suffering look like? It looks like 3 centuries of enslavement. It looks like 5 decades of push and pull politics, progress, and pseudo-citizenship. And it looks like a standard of racism that interlocks systems of oppression. And with this history, Black people must navigate a system that constantly supports their suffering and denies their humanity in many instances. And racism is more complex than a racist remark. It is socially embedded into the consciousness of both American and global societies. And racism has actually been identified as a chronic stressor with links to negative health outcomes from psychological illness to the common cold. So what does that look like? In a recent government survey that compared African Americans to non-Hispanic whites, or Black folks to white folks, Black people of all ages were more likely to be victims of a serious violent crime, making them more likely to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, twice as likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, 20% more likely to report a serious psychological illness, more likely to experience feelings of sadness, worthlessness, and hopelessness. And if those Black people were living below poverty, they're 3 times more likely to report serious psychological distress. Now, in Western-centered health models, illness is a part of the symptoms that cause it. And that being said, racism is rarely identified as a stressor in Black suffering. In African-centered health models, illness is viewed as a fluid and continuous manifestation of dynamic relationships within the community, nature, and family. And I also found that in Black communities, mental illness is highly stigmatizing. So really what I'm saying is not only do we suffer from racism, but when we bring up these illnesses in our community, we're sometimes stigmatized. And on top of that, if we get past the stigma and into a doctor's office, into a therapist's office, often racism isn't a factor in our suffering. So how do Black people with centuries of suffering cope? As I searched for answers to this own question of mine, my own life was a living example. In the city I grew up in, Black and white appeared equal. I was that smart Black girl, and the privileges that it granted me also blinded me to the racism I experienced every day. My smarts made me a good one, a different one, a type of Blackness that was non-threatening to American society. But when that shattered, when my identity came to a point where I realized that America only accepted people with certain standards, I was awakened to the concept of W.E.B. Du Bois, what he called double consciousness, the experience of being both Black and American. I was anxious all the time. I felt like an imposter in my own skin. I demeaned myself with my thoughts because I couldn't go on as this type of self that made my blackness invisible so that I could be accepted. I stopped thriving in the spaces I used to, school, particular social settings, even church. I began seeing myself differently. I stopped seeing myself in isolation and rather saw myself in the context of American society. Everything in my life took on a different layer of meaning. Some of my studies reflected it. Some of my teachers reflected it. The advertisements I passed by reflected it. Racism was embedded in our society in a way I had not begun to unpack. I was disenchanted, disillusioned, seeing sources of internalized racism in myself, and seeing my ultimately jaded view of the world. Ignoring racism does not work. Being silent about racism perpetuates a system of oppression. Internalizing racism promotes illusion and self-hatred, and denying racism as a chronic stressor in Black folks' lives is denying their lived experiences. The only way to combat racism is to stare it dead in the face. So I stared at it and I sat with it. When I began sitting and being present with racism, I found myself in the arms of a people of color meditation community. Finding it was a fluke, but it was nothing short of destiny. When I began sitting in a community of meditators who looked like me, I found a new way to deal with my suffering. I sat and I was made visible. I shared my experiences and they were validated. I found sources of internalized racism I didn't even know was there. And I began to realize that the worthlessness, the anger, the sadness were not mine. The practice gave me a new way to interact with my suffering and validate myself. Now, meditation is not about clearing out all of your thoughts. It's not about becoming crazy spiritual or enlightened. It's about making a better way and becoming a better person in this world. And now many people use various types of meditation, some to manage stress and anxiety, but the particular one I use cultivates mindfulness and awareness in the present moment. When I sit, I become more aware of how I interact with the world outside of me, whether it's people, whether it's places, whether it's simply how my thoughts affect me. I find a new pathway to restore health and well-being to my life. So instead of pushing away the negative thoughts and feelings, instead of holding so tight to the joy and the inspiration around us, I find a more healthy way to understand who I am in this body, with this history, in this life. And now, I'm not saying that meditation can cure racism, but what I am saying is that it offers Black folks another way to directly touch their suffering, validate it. Because truth is, the things that we experience in everyday life are stored in our psyche and body. And there's not many spaces where we can come and be safe and say, this is my experience. So as a practice, meditation allows us to become better at who we are in this world. Now, I want to put all my talking to work. That's really the point of meditation, to actually take the time to put in the practice. So hopefully everyone is okay. I'm going to begin a meditation practice today. My instructions are pretty simple, so if you would like, you can walk out of here right now today and practice on your own. So I'm going to introduce y'all to my chime. Ooh. When I hit it, that's the beginning of our practice. So now, here are the instructions. Make sure your feet are firmly planted on the ground. Give y'all some time. Place your hands in your lap, whatever feels comfortable. And then I want you to take the crown of your head right here, just pull it up to the heavens for me. So right here. And then take the biggest breath that you've taken all day right now. And when you let it out, breathe in a way that feels comfortable, that feels natural to you. Look around, make sure everyone's good. Okay. And the last step, if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes, or you can hold a soft gaze downward. That'll be about at the back of the chair in front of you. Making sure everyone's good. Let's sit. And as we're coming back into the room next to whoever's sitting beside you, I just want you to notice how your body feels. Notice how your breath rises and falls. And just notice how it feels to be who you are in this present moment. For those of us who are barred out of spaces, for those of us who deal with the many oppressions internally and don't have a healthy outlet to interact with them, I ask that you sit. I ask that you create space, because is it not revolutionary? Is it not liberatory to create the spaces for yourself that your society does not create? Thank you.